Hello ladies and gentlemen, today I'm going to show you how to upgrade the Creality CR-10S Pro Printer to be more stable on the Z-axis. If you have this printer, you will have noticed that there is an issue with the stability of the Z-axis. The axis can be driven when the stepper motors are disabled, and therefore the leveling of the axis is off and the print quality is not good. To fix this, we are going to mount some new T8 anti-backlash nuts. They are quite cheap from Aliexpress or Amazon. To do this, the first thing we have to do is to loosen the coupler screws. Then we are going to loosen the upper screws from the nut. We are going to screw the rod up a bit so that we can get the old nut out. We are going to take the hex key and hold the nut on the downside with some pliers, and we are going to loosen it. It depends on what version of printer you have. On my version it uses a self-locking nut. On other versions it's a normal nut and a spring washer. The result will be the same. Just loosen the screws and put it somewhere where you can find it later. Okay, now we are going to loosen the two coupler screws. Then we can lift the guide rod up a bit. There are two spring washers between the nut and the base plate here. Make sure you don't lose them. Now you can put the guide nut or the nut down and lift the rod so that you can get the nut all the way down. Here's our nut. Now we are going to install the anti-backlash nut. The anti-backlash nut consists of three parts. The upper part, the down part, and a spring in between. We are going to push them together so that it looks like this. And the sense of it is that the two parts of the nut are spring loaded now, and therefore it will bring some force on the rod so that it won't work itself up or down. So now I'm going to screw the first part of the nut onto the rod, but just a bit. Then I'm going to mount the spring, and then I'm going to mount the under or the down part of the nut, and make sure that the spring is that the rod is up. Then we're going to stick them together and screw the rod into the screws. We will notice that here is a bit air between the nut halves, this is okay, this is no problem. And now we are going to screw the nut up so that we can mount it again. Okay, the next part is to install the screws. Make sure that the spring washer is on the screw. Put the spring on the anti-backlash nut down all the way and feed the spring through the holes. Once it's done, you can release the spring. Okay, for the second screw we are going to need some tweezers. Okay, the two screws are in place. Now we are going to fit the two spring washers between the screw, between the anti-backlash nut and the base. And then we continue with the second side. For this I'm going to lift the axis up a bit, grab the spring washers and put them in place. And then we are going to put the axis back down again. And now we can tighten the two nuts. Make sure that you don't over tighten them. We want to tighten them as much that the spring washers are just a tiny bit loaded, not too much. And we're going to do the same with the second screw. Okay, the first side is finished. We have to tighten the coupler screws here. Make sure that the nut is all the way down, and also make sure that the coupler is lifted up all the way, and then tighten the coupler screws. You can tighten them quite tight so that you don't have some slip in the coupler. Okay, now the first side is done. Now for the second side. The second side will be a bit trickier, but it's also doable. I'd recommend to loosen the flat flex cable here. Then the first thing we have to do is undo this cover plate. Therefore we're going to loosen the upper two screws, and there's also one screw down here. Okay, now that we have unmounted the cover, we have to loosen two screws down here to get the PCB down. Now with the PCB out of the way, we can loosen the nut inside here. Now that the nuts are down, you can, or you should, loosen the screws, because there is a thread in the old T8 nuts so that you can undo the screws. Make sure that you don't lose the spring washer. Okay, now that we have loosened the upper lead screw, we are going to loosen the coupler again. Turn the lead screw. The nut is going down, and we're going to screw it all the way down. We have to cut the second anti-backlash screw here a bit so that it won't collide with the stepper motor. Therefore you can use a file or an angle grinder or a saw. I'm going to do this now and then we will continue. Okay, as you can see, I've cut this part of the anti-backlash screw here, and now we can mount it again. We are going to screw the upper part of the anti-backlash screw on the rod a bit. We mount the spring and we put the second part in, then we compress it and we screw it onto the rod. Now I'm going to put in the holding screws here so that I have a little bit more space. The second one is in too. I'm going to put the spring washers onto the screws now, and then we're going to fit them through the holes. Okay, now that we have fitted the screws in, we can put on the nuts. This will work best with some tiny tweezers or tiny fingers. And if you have put them on, you can tighten them now. Again, not too much. Okay, now we are finished with the installation. We have to tighten the coupler again. Make sure that it is all the way, that the guide rod is all the way down. Now we are going to screw the PCB on again. Make sure that the isolating cloth is in the proper space. Now you can also check if all the connections and cables are still in place. And after that we are going to install the cover. Now the last step is to mount the flat flex cable again, and we are finished. Okay, now that we have installed the anti-backlash nuts, we have to level the gantry, and then we have to level the bed, and then we have to do the auto level routine, and then we are finally finished. We have to turn on the printer. The first thing we have to do is to disable the steppers. and then we are going to put the gantry down by hand. You can already feel that the nuts have a little bit more friction, and when you push on the axis, the gantry won't come down by itself. This is good. Now we take our spacer. You can either use the one provided by the printer, or I use two grinded spacers and put them under each side and move the gantry down until they touch. I'm going, or the way I do this is I put it down and wiggle from side to side a bit to check the distance, because when you go down onto the spacer, the gantry can slide from side to side a bit, and the result won't be that good. So I go down until there is almost no play on either side, and then when this is accomplished, I'm going to go in the settings menu on the move bar and drive the Z-axis up a bit. This will enable the steppers, and now the gantry is leveled. The next thing we're going to do is go in the leveling routine, which is here. The printer will home itself. We're going to the aux leveling bar here, and we are going to the first left corner, and now we use the 0.2mm shim to measure the height under the nozzle. There are four wheels under the pad here. You have to put the gauge under the nozzle, and then you turn the wheel until you can feel that the gauge is binding. We're going to do this for all four corners, and after that we check it again. Make sure that the shim is binding on all 4 points with the same strength. Now that we have done all 4 sides, we're going to check our setting again. Normally this will only be done one time if everything is set up correctly. Okay, now the leveling by hand is done, and now we are going to the auto measuring, and therefore the bed will be heated to a certain temperature, and then the machine will make 25 points all over the bed. It will save the values, and therefore it will auto level the bed. It is the best practice to make the bed as level as possible, also make the gantry as level as possible. Now that the bed leveling process is done, our hot end will be heated up, and then we should set the Z offset. The Z offset is the difference between the point where the sensor triggers and the point where the hot end will be. In our case, this will be around 0.5 millimeters, but that part or that measurement is best to be set while printing the first layer. So just for a short explanation about what we have done here, you can see the different values here. These measurements are the offset between our Z home point or Z0 and the actual measurement. The Z0 point is about here. So when you start up the printer and you home all the axes, the printer or the print head will go all the way to the left, and the build plate will and all the way to the front, and then it will drive a certain amount to the right and back, and then it will move downward until the sensor triggers. This is our Z0 point, and the offsets we have measured here are the points away, or the difference between our Z0 point and the actual measured point. So you can see here we have minus 0.026. On the most left side we have minus 0.037, and you can see the values here. This means we have a little bit of an offset of the manual leveling we've done. This is no problem. These are a few hundredths of millimeters, so this will be okay. But we can clearly see here that the right back corner of our build plate is a little bit too low. And we also can see here that we have here a minus 0.02, and the next two values are positive. That means our build plate is not 100% straight. This won't be an issue, but I'm just explaining this here. Okay, now that we have done this, I'm going to lubricate the Z rods a bit, and then we're going to make our first print. Okay, now for lubricating the Z-axis screws, we are going to use some grease and some tissue. Put a little bit of grease onto the tissue and rub it on the tissue, and then move the tissue on the Z-axis. We're going to do this on both axes, of course, and then we are going to drive the axis up a bit, so we can do the same on the lower part of the lead screw. Make sure that the steppers are enabled so you don't mess up the leveling of the gantry. And then we are finished. I'm going to do a little test print now to set the Z offset. I have the G code already on the SD card. I go to print, select the part and then go to print. Now the printer will home itself to set up the Z offset. We're going to the menu point adjust, and here you can see I've already set the minus 0.5 millimeters. We're going to check this now, and then we let the printer do its thing. Okay, now everything seems good. If you have any questions, let me know. I will provide the link to the anti-backlash nuts in the descriptions, and I wish you a nice day. Thank you for watching, and I hope we'll see you soon.